They call it the Cheyenne Wind, and it rips through Wyoming with relentless and remorseless force. However, it was never more chilling or carried more tears than in the spring and summer of 1942 for the 11,000 Japanese Americans that had been interned by the United States government at the Hart Mountain Relocation Center.
Well, the day we got there, there was this tremendous wind just blowing across the plain with sagebrush tumbling across the sand and colder than blazes. And for those of us from California, totally unaccustomed to this kind of cold weather. I mean, that's something you drive to. It's not something you find on your front doorstep. And so then we got to our barracks and there was this fine silt all over the place because of the wind blowing the sand into the barracks buildings. And so that was our welcome to Wyoming.
Norman Mineta has had a remarkable career in public service and has long been San Jose's favorite son. In 1971, he was elected mayor and served as the first American of Asian Pacific ancestry as a mayor of a major American city. He would go on to serve 20 years in Congress representing the Silicon Valley. Later in his career, Mineta was named to President Clinton's cabinet, and he served as Secretary of Commerce, becoming the first Asian Pacific American to serve in a president's cabinet. Despite the fact that Mineta is a longtime Democrat, he was asked to serve in the incoming Republican administration of George W. Bush as Secretary of Transportation. In the harrowing hours of 9/11, it was Mineta who ordered all the planes out of the sky following the terrorist attack that marked that infamous day. History has always shaped Mineta's life, and his ideal boyhood growing up in San Jose was shattered for the first time 67 years ago.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Well, we had just returned home from the Japanese Methodist Church, and it was just a little past noon, and the phone started ringing. And so all these questions about my dad, about what's going on in Hawaii, and what will be the impact on those of us of Japanese ancestry. Next door, we had the executive director of the Japanese Association living there. And we had a hedge between our home and the home next door. And that way Joyce or Irving and I would be able to crawl through the hedge between our homes. And all of a sudden, about 1:30 or so, Joyce comes running in our back door yelling, "The police are taking Papa away, the police are taking Papa away." So my dad ran out of our house, went next door, but by that time, Mr. Hirano was gone, and the FBI had whisked him away.
Panic gripped the nation following the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the target of that fear and hysteria were the Japanese Americans. Within 3 months, President Roosevelt had signed Executive Order 9066 that called for the forcible evacuation of the 120,000 Japanese Americans. Entire families were shipped off to 10 deserted and remote imprisonment camps in the western and southern parts of the United States.
I've only seen my dad cry 3 times. And the first time was on the 7th of December because he couldn't understand why the land of his birth was now attacking the land of his heart. He loved the United States. Secondly, it was the 29th of May, 1942, when we were boarding the trains and we were pulling out of San Jose, and I looked up and there were all these tears coming down from my dad's face.
Despite the guard towers, the isolation, and the fact that they'd been forced from their homes and their jobs, the Japanese Americans persevered, and they did their best to endure their armed captivity.
I think philosophically, Japanese and Asians in general, I think have this sort of, it's a phrase in Japanese called shikata ga nai. You can't help it. It's a circumstance that you can't do anything about. And so you try to do the best that you can given the circumstance. And so I think there was a great deal of gaman, which is enduring the hardship, shikataganai. This is your fate in life. You got to accept it. And so you sort of just push on based on the circumstances around you and make the best that you can.
After the war, Mineta would go on to graduate from San Jose High School and then Cal. His 20 years in Congress were marked by a number of achievements, but his proudest moment came when he helped to lay the groundwork and was instrumental in readdressing the injustices of the Japanese Americans during World War II.
To think that your own government thinks of you as being disloyal, thinks of you, and that whole shame of distrust and disloyalty that the government sort of put on the backs of those of Japanese ancestry was a yoke that they carried from, let's say, in that early 1942 period for all these years. And when President Reagan on August 10, 1988 signed H.R. 442 into law, and there was that phrase that, and on behalf of the American people, the United States Congress apologizes for the gross violation of the civil rights, of the basic human rights of those of Japanese ancestry. And it was then, I think, that yoke of shame was then taken off everybody's shoulders.
Awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award for exceptional meritorious service, in 2006, Norman Mineta has lived, worked, and flourished during a compelling period of American history. For a youngster from the Santa Clara Valley, it's been an amazing journey.
There have been a number of times when I pinch myself and think, now what's a little kid like you from San Jose, California, doing in a place like this? But again, that really points to the greatness of this country in terms of the opportunities that are available, and with the help of mentors, people who have guided me over the years, I've had a heck of a ride.